Thank you, Andras, and hello, everyone. It's really great to see so many of you already back, and I hope the others will join. There's for sure good reason to join because I'm here with an incredible lineup of panelists. I'm really happy that you're all here. And as Andras said, we would like to shed a light into the outside cellular world. And in order to do so, we have different parts of the ecosystem. And as I did with my previous panel, I would like to do a bit of a different intro. You saw the slide that was put up, and also you have the speaker bios. So that's I think not necessary to go into detail there. But many of you might focus more on cellular standards, and therefore my intro question would be whether each of you could let the audience know how you and your companies relate to the standardization, and in particular, or also organization, not only companies, and in particular to outside cellular standards. For example, are you involved in standardization processes? In which SDOs? Do you contribute to standards? Do you implement SEPs, etc.? So, John, let's start with you.
Great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is John Dubiansky, and I'm the Senior Director of Intellectual Property and Standards Policy at Dolby Laboratories. Dolby just celebrated its 60th anniversary. We were founded in 1965 in London and are currently headquartered in San Francisco. And throughout our entire history, we have centered our activities on delivering and developing the best audio and video experiences for consumers. In addition to standards, licensing and innovation are a key part of our history. If you go back to when we started, Mr. Ray Dolby founded the company to commercialize some patented inventions he had in noise reduction in magnetic tapes. The first application was for manufacturing the reel-to-reel noise reduction used in recording studios. But soon after that, there became the clear application in the consumer market for the magnetic cassette tapes. And since that time, as a small startup company founded by the inventor, Mr. Dolby adopted a policy and practice of licensing and partnering with manufacturers across the value chain to bring his technologies to market. It allowed him to take his inventions and scale them up to the entire world. That practice continues today. We have two primary lines of business. The first, with which many of you are familiar, is our branded business, where we create and disseminate branded audio and video technologies that improve consumer experience in the cinema, at home, and in a variety of other use cases, including Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision, used, I think, by many streaming platforms and other services today. And we also have a patent licensing business where we contribute our technologies to collaborative standard setting and then contribute those patents to collaborative licensing structures like patent pools to, again, broadly disseminate them throughout the value chain.
Great, thank you. Scott?
I'm Scott Hayden, the VP of IP at Amazon. At Amazon, we use standards many ways in things that we sell. So think about barcodes, product labels, and things like that that are incorporated into those. But where we spend a lot of our time, or I spend a lot of my time, is in the SEP world that's related to Wi-Fi, into many of our products, our TV products and devices that use Wi-Fi, the Alexa products, and then also with the video codecs and audio codecs.
So before I start, I have to say thank you to Andras and Nina for bringing this lawyer back to where she started her career in Geneva almost 20 years ago. But in order to answer the question about who do I work for and what does IEC do in the world of international standards, I have to go much further back than 20 years ago. I have to go to the 1904 World Congress, World Fair, where we had the first international electrical congress, where the topic of the day was alternating currents and direct currents. So you can imagine, we've been producing standards decades before even the invention of cellular technology. IEC's standards cover everything from electrical safety and products, electrotechnical equipment and components, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and the common patent policy, which is common to IEC, ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and the ITU, which we know well. We're pretty close to them. We're the three organizations that form the World Standards Cooperation. Three of the international standardizing organizations all abide to and subscribe to.
Thank you, Claudia.
Okay, I think I'm in the age war here. I work for Panasonic, which is a company that's more than 100 years old. Recently, I had the pleasure of trying to explain to some newcomers as to what we do at the R&D department. I look into the history of standards. I counted at least back to 1975, where we have the war of Betamax and VHS. I don't know how many people still remember that, but when I told the young people about that, they look at me funny. So that's, I think, how far we have come. Panasonic has been involved in standardization for more than 50 years, and we have been both a technical contributor and also implementer that brings the product to the market, so then the people can enjoy the benefit of the standard. I joined Panasonic in 2017 and started building up some of the licensing programs, and we see some fruitions last year with the UPC decisions and other events. So hopefully we can contribute to this discussion.
This is great. This makes me the young kid. we're less than 30 years old.
We are all young at heart, I would say. Everyone here, I've no doubt. So, as in the previous panel I moderated, I would like to give you a bit of an outline what we are covering in the next 50 minutes. So technically, we would like to, again, to use the name ecosystem, we would like to look at it from the standardization part, and here also compare a bit the inside cellular and outside cellular world, and over time what has happened, different perspectives that you have just heard our panelists bring to the table. And then we come to licensing and also litigation, as we have heard in previous panel. That is sometimes also happening when deals are not closed, and look into matters there. And to sum up, of course, we would also like to ask our panelists about if they had a wish and what could we do, what's the policy that you would change if you could. And just at that point, I would also like to emphasize that the panelists that are here joined with me are representing impressive companies, but are speaking on their own behalf. Everything that they say shouldn't be quoted in litigation. So please, just so that we can frankly speak. And yeah, so let's start. And I would say, as we have heard, Claudia is active in the standardization procedure at IEC, and you mentioned the shared patent policy. And maybe you can give us a bit of an overview. We have heard in the competition law panel before that, for example, under ETSI, we have the stipulation pour autrui, etc. And what is the case with you? Is there Swiss law applicable? We are all a bit curious, so please.
So I'll start off with that question, which I have to admit I don't think I had actually looked at until this week, because Swiss courts haven't looked at this question. That being said, I've had a nice discussion with one of our fantastic colleagues, Jacques de Vera, who's at the University of Geneva as well, and exchanged some of my ideas. In Swiss law, if the Swiss courts were to look at this, and I suspect this is the case for many jurisdictions, they would probably look to Article 112 of the Code of Obligations, and they would think of the declaration as a binding engagement that creates a third-party beneficiary, basically, right? And you would be able to enforce that engagement through estoppel or good faith, which is at the very fundament of every Swiss contract, if you will. The common patent policy itself is agnostic. It doesn't say that there is any jurisdiction that is going to be required of any patent holder or patent applicant for them to submit their patent statement and licensing declaration. And actually, even in that declaration, you'll see there's a very small detail about future assignees of a patent. And it even already anticipates that there might be other jurisdictions that actually will look at that declaration, and that the assignee must make sure that that assignment is one that would allow for the common patent policy to work. But it doesn't give you the answers, which jurisdiction would take precedence over another. It doesn't do that. So nevertheless, I do think what's interesting, to sort of take a little step back, and so if you'll let me, Nina, I do want to point out, so IEC is one of the 3 organizations that publishes and develop international standards, has a couple things that make us quite different than other SDOs. You've mentioned ETSI. So of course, ETSI, I think, and Magali Fitzgibbon, I know, is somewhere in the room. She's in the next panel. Will throw something at me if I say anything wrong. So I'm relying on you, Magali. But they're one of the 3 ESOs, right, that have been created under Regulation 1025 of the EU. For IEC, we were created by our members, and our members represent the standardization views of their countries. And the same would go for ISO. We have actually a very similar legal structure, a little bit different than ITU, but also has a robust membership. So when international standards are created at IEC, they're written by, yes, 30,000 experts across the globe, 170 different countries, different fields of expertise, but they're voted upon by our participating members. You need to have 2/3 of the participating members to get an international standard, and no less than 1/4 can be against. That means that the standard can take up about 3 years to be published. But then what you do get is a standard that complies under the WTO TBT principles for openness, transparency, global consensus, and the development dimension, and so forth. So that's, I think, one of the most important aspects to sort of highlight in terms of differences for IEC as an international standards organization and other SDOs.
Great. Can you maybe also elaborate a bit, or the others that were maybe involved in standard setting in this field? Is it the working method? Is it different, for example? How do you develop your standard? I mean,
Yeah, so I think they start with an idea brought by a member. So again,
and who are members? Are these also companies that?
Not companies. And I think that's important. Thank you, Nina, for sort of pulling that out a bit, because it can be a little bit confusing. Our members are national electrotechnical committees. At ISO, they're called national standards bodies. We're a little bit different because our national committees are really only dedicated to technology, electrotechnical affairs, electricity, electronics. So those bodies, there can be only one per country, right? And we have about 80 full members. There's about, 60 full members, 80 members in total. They're the ones who vote for a standard to be created, to be drafted at the different drafting stages, the modifications required, and then finally to be approved. The standards themselves, of course, are not written by national committees, in the same way that they're not written by secretariat staff. They're written by experts who are appointed to represent that nation's standardization expertise.
Thank you. I think that was not clear to all in the room. And let me maybe bring the others into the standardization. And you all mentioned that you were also active on audio-video codecs. And let's maybe look at H.264 and H.265 and H.266. So, John, would you like to elaborate a bit? What is it? What are the differences? What is to come?
Sure. So 264, 265, 266 refer to a series of video codecs that have been developed really through a structure that's a collaboration of ISO and IEC, the MPEG working group, as well as ITU, which collectively is the JVT collective group. And this work really began with the MPEG-2 standard from ISO IEC that was, I think, published in 1995. That was one of the first modern video codecs that used, what's since the beginning of a trajectory of block-based transform coding that has involved at least 4 successive generations and iterations, moving to AVC, HEVC, and now today VVC. Each one significantly reduces the file size necessary to transmit video in a variety of formats. I think I've heard the figure that each one's about half as small as the prior, so that would make HEVC about 70% as small as MPEG-2. I'd like to highlight that this structure has continuously innovated and brought new technologies to market, even as the implementation of those technologies has changed. If you go back to MPEG-2 in '95, that really ushered in the area of digital television, broadcast HDTV, DVDs as well. Those were the mechanisms that were enabled by this original technology. To move forward a decade, 264 further reduced file size, and it was foundational to allow the formation of technologies such as streaming over the top and over the internet. And as a result, not only was the technology evolving, but also the use cases have continuously evolved as the marketplace has evolved over time. The final point I'd like to raise is if you look at this endeavor, it brings in a lot of different innovators that are able to contribute. I've seen figures from some third parties that I think suggest that perhaps the top 10 wireless patent owners own 75% of the stack. Same figures would suggest the top 10 video owners for some of the existing technologies own like 40%. The top 20 own 50%. So it's a much more diverse group. As the panel previously mentioned, HEVC between the pools collectively license over probably 80, almost 90 different innovators, license their IP. They've run the gamut from large companies, little tech companies, universities, research institutes as well. So I think it's a pretty broad group that contributes.
Would you like to chip in as well?
Yeah, thank you, John. I think John pretty much covered a lot of stuff that I think it's right. I think what I can do, working as someone who works for a really old company, is to kind of walk back in time to kind of look at the composition of the member who made the contribution, the ones that formed the patent pool first, and then to go through each generation of the standard to see where the new contributors are coming in, and where they stand in the licensing point, and then in the latest generation, 266, where you see additional members coming in from a different sector in the market. So let me start from maybe 262, which is I think the oldest one. I think being in Japan, you hear a lot of old stories, and one of the stories I heard was that the first modern patent pool, the HA 262 pool, was formed because engineers were working on the standard and said, we'd like to use the standards, but we see a licensing problem. Let's come fix it. So that's kind of the starting point where people start fostering that pool. When you go to HA 264, it actually started with just 14 members in the patent pool. And out of the 14, 11 companies were operating companies at the time in the pool. So that kind of gives you the composition of the pool and kind of why this pool has become so successful, because of the way it is easily accessed by the people who actually implement it, and also it's at the level where the market can easily accept. So it's actually a very strong story. I think in many sense the gold standard for patent pool. Out of those operating companies, about 60% come from Asia. I think that's another aspect of things. I think Asian companies tend to want to work out issues rather than litigate. So that kind of goes to that aspect of things. Right now, I think there are more than 44 members as licensors in the patent pool. When we go to the next generation, I didn't count the starting point, but I look at currently the two patent pools that exist. Access Events has 376 licensors.
Maybe just to stick a bit to the order, I think the pool we would like to also look a bit more on the licensing.
Okay.
So maybe also for those, I just noticed we again come more to the expert discussions, and I'm pretty sure, can you as a technology expert also explain how do you do that now? What is the encoding, decoding, etc.? How is that done? Or
I think if you look at different generations, right?
Yeah.
From a television maker, you see image quality getting improved. But then when you have later generations,
Yeah.
It does have different relationship with the products being
Yeah.
sold in the market.
Yeah.
Television, we go to 4K, maybe 8K, but then beyond that, I think it's beyond human perception. You can't really tell what it is. But if you have a product like a smartphone, you might not do the best image quality, but then you get a lot of benefit from getting the compression ratio by saving your bandwidth. And then that goes on to, for example, when John was talking about is the streaming services. They can derive a lot of benefit from the back end, maybe save on the push through. So each generation of the standard, I think, will have different relationship to either the product or services that's being provided. And I think it's important for us to think about, how do we manage this ecosystem so that we can attach the right value to the standards so that we can continue to innovate, support our engineers.
Great, thank you. So before we go back to maybe H.264 and 5, let's also bring Scott in. And I was wondering, because one also reads about the Alliance for Open Media, who has, for example, developed VP8, VP9, AV1. And can you elaborate a bit on that? How is that an SDO, or what is this?
It's a group of companies that got together to form an alternative to 264, 265, AVC and HEVC, one that would be royalty-free. And so in seeing the difficulty associated with the cost, who are the actual licensors, how do you actually complete all those licenses, the companies got together and said, we'll try and create this alternative. One of the problems associated with that, though, is that the people that had the patents on 264, 265, and other video codecs said they believed that those patents read on AV1. And so rather than having a royalty-free video codec that people could use, it's just created more either licensing revenue or litigation or disputes.
If I could, I just like to, I'm only aware of this organization from the outside, but I think it raises a very interesting point that ties very nicely back to the conversation we had this morning on competition as well, which is that this organization is a collaboration of members of industry, but it doesn't do its activities through one of the established international standards bodies. Regulation 1025/2013 in EU establishes a list of ESOs, European Standards Organizations, international standards bodies, of which IEC is one. WTO, TBT, equivalent laws in the U.S. lay out a set of procedural criteria, including things such as the use of the FRAND commitment that establish a degree of confidence on its face about the processes and procedures by which standards are developed. Certainly, it's possible, there was citation made of Betamax and VHS to develop standards outside of this framework. But when it's done so, it's really done pursuant to the governing arrangement between the members. And I think that the panel earlier today raised interesting questions about the role of the FRAND commitment and the protections and obligations that it imposes. But when you're moving outside of that framework, you need to, of course, examine the specific policies of the organization. So I raise that as an interesting observation that there are not just different standards bodies in our sector, but actually standards or formats that are developed outside of the standard-setting organizations as well.
I wonder if I can also just jump in real quick, because I think something that's interesting in an ecosystem, or if it's natural phenomena, I'm not sure. Andersh is not here, maybe, I'm not sure. Is that we can end up working together. So I said that for international standards at IEC, it takes about 3 years. And that's obviously challenging for certain companies that want to use standards that then have this kind of level playing field for technology. We do end up having relationships with consortia, and there is, under our directives shared with ISO, a manner to fast-track specifications that were not at the level of an international standard or even other regional standards into something that is an international standard with the caveat that, of course, the common patent policy will apply. So friend or free will be permitted, but not one over the other.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the questions that's been raised is zero friend? And to me, it's the easiest friend. You know, if the standard cost is zero, how can it be anything more than fair, and how could it be anything more than, or other than reasonable and non-discriminatory? It's zero for everyone.
If I may, I think this really highlights the need to examine the nature of the commitments at issue, because again, I think everyone should examine specifically what is guaranteed by the participants in the process and what's required in consideration. Because although the monetary value, as I understand it, of the offer from this consortia is zero royalty, the license does recite consideration, which can be very valuable, which is a cross-license also on royalty-free terms. And that cross-license can certainly have a lot of value depending on, of course, the value of the licensee. And this is where I think this does differ from, say, a Type 3 declaration in IAC, because as I understand it, you can make a Type 3 declaration that offers royalty-free contingent on a reciprocal royalty-free license, but nevertheless will always guarantee a license to anyone who's willing to cross-license on FRAND terms.
Yeah, Scott, last comment.
I was just going to say, it seems like if you do that, where you require the cross-license, that keeps people from joining, contributing, and then essentially asking for money to be part of that. And so if it essentially makes it free in every direction. You join for free, you give a license to all of your patents for free, so you can't assert those against others. That's part of the cross-license.
You can counter if you
I don't want to get too bogged down in this, but certainly there are many companies out there that would forego considerable value by agreeing to either an affirmative or reciprocal cross-license. And for a variety of reasons, that would make it very difficult for them to participate in these processes. One would hope that the processes, therefore, would avoid the IPR of parties that don't participate in order to provide clarity to the market and allow users of the standard to have confidence that the standard is protected by a licensing commitment. When that process breaks down, however, of course, then certainly innovators and should receive compensation for the use of their innovation, no matter what standard it is that's recommending the use of their technology.
Great. I really like that there's this debate. Let's continue to also incorporate some of the questions. And actually, it was very, very nicely done, because that brings me also to my next question, because someone here asked, what are the challenges in licensing? How do you, or maybe also the differences in how do you license maybe on the device market, and how do you do if you do content licensing? Maybe would you like to start with your license out, and then maybe the other perspective? Yep. And
I guess I can. I think we need to address licensing and licensing out, because this is Panasonic skills that Panasonic occupies.
Yeah.
So traditionally, on the video codec side, Panasonic has heavily relied on the patent pool to function in the market, and we think that patent pool is a very good mechanism to bridge between the standard setting process and the commercialization of the standard, because it does give the one-stop shop element. The patents you get are vetted by neutral third parties, so you're assured with the quality of it. When the patent pool started before the implementation or soon after the implementation of standard, you know exactly how much to plan for, as a product company. So these has been kind of the ways that Panasonic has been dealing with this. And I think that's true from 262 and 264. When we get to 265, it's a little more complicated, because at that time there were differences in terms of what people seek for evaluation of the standard, and how how licensing should be done. And unfortunately, there was a split of opinions, and that led to a little bit of a complicated licensing situation where you have 3 competing patent pools exist in the market. It has now consolidated into 2 because patent pool requires acceptance in the market, and one of them wasn't accepted. So we have remaining pool, one operated by Access Events, the other one run by the VLA, and I think together they capture about 85% of the market. So even with those 2 pool, if you do take the pool licenses, then you resolve a great deal of your issue already, at least from operating company point of view. If you don't take the pool license, you have to individually deal with maybe more than 400 licensors in the market, and that I think is quite unmanageable, from an operating point of view.
It's interesting you mentioned 2 pools, 3 pools. As somebody that's responsible for problem solving, making sure that business can operate the way it wants, it's one where there's no potential limit to the number of pools, in addition to the number of individual patent holders and licensors. So when I say, I can't say to the business, this is how much it's going to cost. I say, well, how many pools are there? Well, there's 2. Well, maybe there's 3. Well, now there's 2. How many licensors are there? I don't know. How much is this going to cost? I don't know. And so as much as I love the pools that have published rates, where you can look at those and say, I know what I have to pay, that's very easy. You can describe that. The problem is, one of those is 75, 80% of the ABC pool. I don't know what the rest of it's going to cost. I've had people that have threatened me, sued me, that say, well, we have 2 or 3%, but we want many times what that pool wants. As somebody that has a math brain, that doesn't make any sense to me. Of like, how do you logically say you've got 5%, but you want to charge me 10 times more than somebody that has 75 or 80%? So I like pools. I like anywhere where there's published rates that I have a starting place and I know at least a place to where I can go from. But the ones that have no connection to that can argue whatever the rate is. They can set their rate at $1 billion per device and say that's my friend rate. That doesn't make sense to me.
Anyone would like to?
I would just like to add an observation, because I think I think this has all been well stated. Again, going back to the panel on pools earlier today, which is that the creation of a pool requires a balancing of interest between licensors and licensees. In many ways, it's like a 2-sided market where you need to attract a critical mass on both sides to be successful. And to do that, again, an attempt to put forth a rate that's acceptable to implementers of the technology, to encourage adoption of the technology, to encourage licensing without friction, that returns a fair return acceptable to patent owners. And you like to involve licensees in that discussion as well. And the fact that there have in times been different pools, I think, reflects a bit of dynamism, and the fact that the market does work, that when approaches aren't adopted, new approaches come. And ultimately, again, we're living in a world where, certainly if you go back to AAC and ABC, you've got nearly 1,000 or more than 1,000 licensees subscribe to technologies, and even in HEVC, you have well over 80 different licensors representing a large percentage of the stack that are available. And I think it still is a preferable world to the world where there's no pool at all.
Great, thank you. I see this is really, we have a lot of questions, and I would like to address them. Can I ask the team to go a bit back so that I see? Yeah. So, okay, we have questions for all of you, I think. We would start maybe with Panasonic, because it opens it a bit up also to Wi-Fi. We only talk about, outside cellular, but there are also other standards. And here it's like, there are other standards than video coding in outside cellular. So let's also have a look at Wi-Fi. Panasonic has been involved in standards and licensing for decades, we heard that. From that long experience, what lessons can today SEP debates around Wi-Fi, 5G, or AI, that's also an interesting one, learn from earlier standard battles? Is that something that you could address?
Yeah, I think Wi-Fi is a little bit of a interesting situation right now. And I think that that situation arises from an IPR policy that was adopted in 2015. And unfortunately, I think I wasn't involved at the time, but I thought the process wasn't, there was no consensus made. And a lot of the strong technical contributors ended up not being able to accept the restrictions that were imposed and adopted into the new IPR policy. So we started seeing companies, including Panasonic, making a negative declaration, saying that we were committed to the prior IPR policy, but not the 2015 one. And actually, I think this issue was recently handled in the UPC case between Huawei and Netgear. And there was some discussion about what commitments people were making, what was the situation at the time. So I think we shouldn't get too much into it, but if you are interested, that's a decision that we can refer to.
Yeah, please go ahead, you too.
That's interesting. You opened up about changing commitments, where some companies have made certain commitments early in the process to get adoption of standards, and then later have made kind of alternative approaches, I guess.
I don't think that's the right characterization. I think the companies were abiding by a certain policy at some point. At the time, a policy was changed without the consensus. So the companies who cannot agree to this new policy, which I think requires calculation based on SSPPU, not enforcing patents or not seeking injunction, and those were things that were not in existence in the prior policy. So naturally, there are some companies that cannot agree with that.
I guess I was thinking about video encode and decode, where now some of the people are saying, well, decode is a standard, but encoding is not.
You to the, and then we come to decoding, encoding, and Scott, you have also a million of questions here, so I will also pick one from there.
I just like to briefly touch upon IEEE. I offered the disclaimer. I actually was not at Dolby at the time. I was in the policy shop at the Federal Trade Commission in the U.S. watching this from the outside. But I think this raises another great example of market dynamics, and I'll go back to the model of a two-sided market, where ultimately the licensing commitments need to be communicated to participants in the process, ex ante, what the commitments are, and then the participants can choose to abide by them or not. It's something that in USG we used to talk about a lot, about the fact that the FRAND commitment is a voluntary FRAND commitment. If you go back to the policy statements that were made in 13 and 19, we talk always about the fact it's a voluntary FRAND commitment. And there are many things that can be said and written by many scholars, some of whom are in this room, about the policy change. But it shows that you change a policy, and participants' willingness to abide by the policy changes. And then, unfortunately, in the case of IEEE, again, if you, at least based on what I've read, and I think they're, it can be characterized different ways, but one result was that you had a standard where all of a sudden the technology wasn't covered by certain policies, and that creates complications.
Yeah, please, Claudia, jump in.
Very quickly, I think it might be worth just comparing the common patent policy, because in a situation for us where we have a type 3, that allows a patent holder to say, I'm not willing to license under FRAND or for free. And what it means at ISO, IEC, and ITU is that the standard stops. So if the technical committee cannot write around and describe the process in a different way, the standard won't get published. It doesn't happen often. Luckily, I think at IEC, there's less than a dozen in the last 10 years, type 3s. So it's not a way that we see patent owners gaming the system. But for us, it's a stark difference. And I think that that's an important thing I just wanted to mention, that you would not see a standard from IEC where you don't have FRAND or free guaranteed.
Great, thanks. I think, Scott, you wanted to say something to that? Okay. Otherwise, we have also questions for you, Scott, here. So let's let's start with one for you, and then also we come back a bit to the zero royalty, and that's for everyone, I think. So here's one for you, Scott. If you don't know what you're going to pay for licenses, why doesn't Amazon proactively approach patent owners or licensing platforms to establish a joint licensing program together? Can you answer that?
I understand the first part. I'm not sure I understand the last part, but we have done that. We've gone out proactively to the people that we're well aware of, and we've said we'd like to take a license to this before. It's a little tricky before you announce a product because you don't want to tell them about your product so that they do something with that you don't want them to. But if you go to them early and say, I need Wi-Fi X, and they say, okay, how many units are you going to sell? I don't know. What's the price going to be? I still don't know. And so we've had people that have said, I won't do anything until you're a couple years in so that I know how many units you've sold, I know what your price is, so that I know how to charge you, tax you for that. So it makes it very difficult in that part. We've gone to some pools where we've been able to work through that. The joint licensing program, I don't know if that means us joining with other people to do that or how we would do that. But I think that's one where we know that there's fellow travelers that we try and I guess encourage people, and I think that's part of what AOM and AV1 were associated with. Of like, can we find an alternative that we can make work?
Great, thank you. Do others want to respond? But I think it was answered. Otherwise, I found also one that was very interesting. The zero royalty licensing. So it's I think an intriguing one. Is zero royalty licensing the future of interoperability standards or a threat to the very system that drives technological innovation? Who wants to start?
I like it from the standpoint of, but I think you have to have the right people in, you have to be well aligned. And I think those are the things that we've seen is you can't have, it's like anything else. If you have a high school project and you have 5 people working on it, and one person does all the work and the other 4 just kind of ride along, that's not fair. So I think you have to find people that are similarly situated, that have a real interest in providing that, defining that problem, solving that problem, and working through that. I think that then can be rewarding in that you are then the ones that do that, and you can then sell the products that come from that. And the gentleman this morning was talking about wireless power transmission. That sounds really cool, but I would hope that they aren't the only ones that have that they are able to then tax me in the future when I need a pacemaker. Well, to recharge you, it's going to cost you X number of dollars. I'd like to have the ability that you have multiple people that would be able to do that. And I think that is one way that if you did that jointly and people really contributed, I also think that that diversity of thought and involvement of different people would create the best standard as opposed to one where somebody's like, well, I want to do 197-bit encryption, and we'll add that to the standard. I'm like, well, is that really any better than 192 or 256? But it just happens to be what goes into the standard. And so I think there's some of that would actually come from having this joint kind of all for one and one for all approach.
Thank you.
So, I'd say, first of all, that the standard ecosystem is very complex, and even we're talking today about now video, which is the second standard compared to wireless baseband. But there's many more, and many standards are offered royalty-free or are never the subject of licensing. That being said, for the very innovation-intensive standards, and really the technology that's embodied in the standards, innovation must be paid for. You're going to need to pay for the innovation, and there are certainly different models of how innovation, the investment in innovation, can be compensated. But by and large, if you go to a zero royalty licensing model, you're going to see innovation ultimately shift to participants who have a different means of funding that innovation. And I think one of the great benefits of innovation in this space was the recombinant nature of the innovation, where you've seen technologies developed for broadcast TV, reapplied to DVD and streaming and elsewhere. And I think one of the key enablers of that was the fact there is a degree of vertical disaggregation of the innovation function, coupled by the fact that the model we have today allows a broad participation from, again, universities, research labs, and others who need to rely upon IP licensing to funnel. I mean, again, there will be standards in the future. They just may not have the full breadth of contribution that you see today.
Yeah, I think I agree with John that innovation requires, a lot of resource. And the companies are devoting a great deal of the resources into these kind of standards that we both consume and we contribute to, and we stand by to support the frame commitment associated with these standards. With the royalty-free standards, sometimes you drive out other people who otherwise would come together and work on the standard with you, and they can work on stuff in the parallel. And in that situation, for example, in the video or communication, where the field is fairly closed, sometimes you see patents that were, outside of the standard process, outside of that frame commitment, but still can read on the standard. And we see some cases from California where the patents were not involved in the standard setting process, but still reads on the product, and those tend to lead to a high damage reward, and it's not overall positive to this ecosystem.
So I'll add a little bit of a different spin, so standards are not written for the purpose of SEPs, right? And I think it's important to think about in the ISO IEC directives in clause 5 of part 2, there is this thing called the performance principle that's described. Standards which are an agreed way of doing something. That's what they are. They're not technology. They're just an agreed way of doing something in a repeatable and consistent way. They're supposed to be written in a way that talks about the performance of something in as technology neutral a way as possible. So when we get to the land of standard essential patents, that's because there was no other way to write that standard. So when we talk about interoperability standards, which IEC is quite famous for, we have safety and interoperability standards, many of which do not have any SEPs declared against. I think the beauty of the common patent policy is that it starts from that default of first, performance is described. Only when you have to go to a specific technology, then you use that technology, and only then would you get to the point of, all right, it's either going to be friend or free, but only to make sure that there's no undue advantage, not that we're going to sort of exclude certain players from the market. The last declaration I've seen in our database was on something we haven't even discussed. It's solar voltaic energy systems, solar energy. And we might find a very, very different licensing ecosystem there. Scott,
Yeah, it's just interesting to me of knowing that the people contributing to the standards bodies are the ones that probably are filing the patent application the day before they come to that meeting and say, here's the way we should do that. And I'm not sure that's always the best way, that I think sometimes there's some horse trading that says, well, if we get to adopt this part of the standard that's mine and that part of it that's yours, then I'll vote for yours, you'll vote for mine. And I'm not sure those are always the best answers.
Okay, I take one last, then we move to the patent policy because we have not so much time left. But just one for again addressing Scott, and isn't having the prospect of being able to license others' IP royalty-free a key incentive to commit own IP for royalty licensing in the first place? Can you answer that? So technically, would you?
Yes. Yes is my answer, I think, is also is like, yeah, so, we've done this in places where we've done zero-cost cross-licenses, where we've said, you can use mine, I can use yours. My best days are the days I don't get sued, and so from that standpoint, I think long ago, there were commitments that were made, like if you'd take away all of our patents and take away everybody else's, we'd be fine. Because then everyone would innovate as fast as they could, and you'd end up with better products.
Maybe to just follow up, because you mentioned it before, and I think Andrew also was hinting to it, that if it's very close, you might, in a royalty-free license, use other patents or it's built up basically on others' patents in the decoding encoding space. How does that work? If one part is royalty free but building on other IP, is there anything to address this? Maybe in
Well, I think we'd still have to pay for it. I think if they didn't make that commitment, they weren't part of the pool or weren't part of the alliance or whatever we called it, that would be one where we'd know that we still have costs associated with that. So I respect the rights, the IP rights of people, for companies, owners, individuals, and so it's just a matter of, my preference is it's just simpler. And I spend a lot of time and money arguing with people, sitting in meetings discussing about what a FRAND rate is when they can have 10 different FRAND rates. Those are hard days.
Anyone of the others want to reply to that from the other perspective? No? Fine. Good. Then let's move on. I would say we arrived at a moment when we saw that there are some issues, but also solutions with the pool addressed. Whether they work or whether they're not work, there are different views. Surely it's a bit more fragmented, we heard in this field maybe. So let's think about, we have policymakers in the room. Let's think about, if you look at your area, like let's keep it in the outside cellular area. Is there anything that you would like to see, any solution that one needs to address on a policy level, or is industry working it out well? What would be something that you would like to see from policymakers or industry?
If I may, I'd really like to emphasize that there is a need for policymakers to appreciate that there is more than one tradition and approach to licensing within standardization. And if you are going to attempt to apply regulation where the requirement is, do you give a FRAND commitment, and then we're going to regulate all this activity, you need to really understand how everybody who gives a FRAND commitment goes about their business, and not just look at one particular sector and how they go about their business. I like to emphasize, of course, the first video codec, the modern codec MPEG-2 came out in, I think, 95 or around that time. It also brought with it the first modern patent pool, the MPEG-LA patent pool. And that brought with it the first modern application of antitrust and competition law to patent pools, the comfort letters that MPEG-LA received from DOJ and from DG Comp. That, in turn, developed a set of principles, including ensuring there are essentiality checks, ensuring that bilateral licensing remains available, that have become enshrined in the technology transfer guidelines that were discussed earlier today and that are currently under review. Again, the previous panel made mention of the Draghi report. One of the issues raised both in the Draghi report and in the competitiveness compass was this notion of the precautionary principle, that there is a concern that sometimes ex post competition enforcement is inadequate and you need to move to ex ante regulation. But in the case of patent pools, the overzealous use of the precautionary principle, as observed by Draghi, can really create regulatory frictions. For example, the technology transfer guideline safe harbor requires that pools perform essentiality checks. And we saw this issue in the European Union, where they were going to require everybody to do a check at a EU-IPO, even if they've already done a check during the pool process. And fortunately, the Parliament walked that back, even as the process was ongoing. But I just reemphasize, not only do we have a way of doing things in our sector, but there's also competition law that guides it, and that regulators that are looking at some form of broadly applicable ex-ante regulation should definitely take note of how we do things.
Maybe being the youngest in the standards body area, from that standpoint, to me, one of the biggest concerns I have is the use of injunctions. If people have committed to making this a standard, and so that you have to do it, you have to practice it the way that they've defined, and they've said, really, it's just about money, they should be willing to accept that. And so if we infringe, then we should pay. I totally agree with that. But the ability to use an injunction for hold up so that I have to pay super FRAND rates doesn't make sense to me. It's one that is illogical. And the second part would be, it would be nice to know, as I said earlier, of just what does it cost to use the technology. So if you want to implement Wi-Fi 5 or Wi-Fi 6, you can say to the business, this is what it costs, and they can decide which one they want to put that into. Some of our devices don't need AC, BE, any of those, but some of that is we don't know what the cost is, and so we don't know how to price that. And so those are the two things that I spend a lot of time with. A published FRAND rate on everything would be great, and if I also knew that that included 100%, that would be a wonderful world. Unfortunately, probably eliminate a lot of licensing people and litigation people, but it would be a simpler world for all of us, I think.
I think I'll give you two answers. I'd say data-driven transparency and cooperation. And I think when it comes to transparency, what I'd love to hear from industry, but also policymakers, is what kind of data would you want? How can, something that I see we're in the midst of is real digital transformation. We're looking at new digital standards-based services and products, and what kind of data would actually help policymakers and industry talk to each other that we could provide. That would be something that I would love to see. And the second thing, in terms of cooperation, I have to say, Nina, when you and Andras and others came to IEC over a year ago, and you said, "What are you guys interested in talking about SCPs?" And I thought, if I'm honest, I thought, well, we're doing a great job. Why do we need to keep talking? And in the last year, to be quite frank, you've convinced me that, right, we do have something to learn from others. We can actually provide more. We should be providing more. And I think that kind of cooperation, whether it be through data exchange or the kind of relationship we have with the EPO, we renewed that agreement just a year ago in terms of giving them data to help the quality of patent examinations, is going to bring only less fragmentation, like the light vessels of light, the fractals of light symphony that we
very nice.
You
very
like
nice.
that, right? That our session alludes to, and much more cooperation, interoperability, and global adoption.
Thank you, Claudia. That would have been an amazing end, but I really saw, and I should have reacted more quickly, because Andrew, you had a rebuttal for Scott, I'm pretty sure.
No, I just want to, talk about the point about not having an injunction in the video space. Maybe in 2017 that when the pool was already very established and was confirmed by the Microsoft decision to be a standard of patent pools, there are still a lot of licensees who are competing in the market. Not licensee, a lot of implementers are competing in the market against good faith licensees. So like then Panasonic decided to assist the pool with the enforcement program against someone who has been competing in the market for 10 years without paying a license. And at the same time, we see good faith licensees losing market share to someone who's not competing fairly in the market. So I think one thing to think about is, as SEP holders, we want to protect a competition, but the competition that we want to protect is a fair competition, not unfair competition. So there are instances where injunction is necessary, but there are other remedies available in different courts. I'm partial to the U.S., triple damages, or I think the same thing is available in China, but sometimes it just takes more time and depends on the market of where the party is operating in. Some remedy is available to those markets, and like Judge Galstrup said, judge our to just apply the law. And I think we have to deal with the facts that others are competing in the market against those who have been behaving well in the market.
A valid point. If you have to wait for 5 years of litigation, 6 years of appeals, and things like that, that makes it difficult. But hopefully that's when we could do it faster. But someone getting an injunction in 3 days after they filed suit, that doesn't quite seem fair. Without even coming to you in the first place, they go straight to the court. They filed. They ask for an injunction. That's something that is very hard to address.
I think you have a specific jurisdiction in mind, do you?
Probably a couple, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. I think we still have 1 minute left. And of course, I use every minute I have with these panelists. So technically, I really like the point Claudia made, because of course, we are here at WIPO. As Andras presented, we have our strategy. We would like to offer a platform of discussion. and we also work with STOs, as you will also hear in the next panel that comes. And is there anything that anyone on this panel would like us to maybe continue to specifically address? Just a very, very quick round. It's just we are very curious. So maybe just a last quick answer round as a end.
Some have said to me that they don't want transparency, but then they said that was me that didn't want transparency. I guess I'll just put that out of like, I'm ready for transparency. I think it would be helpful for others. And if not, maybe there's a way to use AI and an LLM that everybody could put all their licenses in. You could submit your offer from the other side, and it would give you a red, yellow, green. And red would say, no, this offer is crazy, and so they can't get an injunction. But if it's green, it says I should do it. Then they can get an injunction if I don't do it.
And we should host that, or what?
We could host that?
No, I was asking. I was asking from WIPO's perspective. So
whoever, AWS has.
Okay,
Amazon has.
It's noted. It's noted.
Could do that?
It's noted. Interesting, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think on several panels I've heard, and certainly agree myself, that private-based licensing solutions like patent pools are often a very effective way to bring transparency and liquidity to IP markets. And I think there should be an ongoing dialogue about how both licensors and licensees, as well as policymakers, can contribute to the successful adoption of these practices.
Great. We like dialogue, that's for sure. Claudia?
So I would say, I've listened to the patent strategy, which I think is really quite compelling. A strategy should be flexible. If I were to ask, WIPO to be one thing, I'd say to be patient, because as different actors in this ecosystem get to know each other better, one thing that we want to do is to bridge the gaps. And then I hope that the strategy or patent strategy will continue to be even more ambitious than it is today and allow us to bridge those gaps.
Thank you. Anu, you have the last word. I'm already over time now.
Oh, sorry.
So
Education and providing platform for discussion. We are at an era where these fundamental technology enable us to do new things, to provide new service, provide new products. And it is important for us to look at the technology and how they contribute, and to look at who derive from the benefit of these technology, to make sure that we create a system where the fairness can be achieved.
great. With this, I would say thank you so much. This was a great panel. Thank you to the audience. We really appreciated your questions. And I would say a big round of applause for my great panelists.